In this lesson, we'll start by installing GNU Privacy Guard on Windows and then on OS X for Mac. In this example, Charlie is a Windows user and Alice and Bob are OS X users. Each party will install GnuPG and create a public and private key pair in the GPG keychain. Then we will look at the functionality of GPG as it relates to sending email messages and files. Alice and Bob will use the functionality associated with the GPG graphical user interface. These functions are similar in the Windows GPG implementation. It is important to note that all of the functions associated with the GUI can be found via the GPG command line functions. In fact, the functionality of the command line is a superset of what can be found in the GUI interface. But for most non-automated functions, the graphical user interface will do the job. Also, GPG is installed by default in many GNU Linux distros. And if you want a deeper dive into GPG, GnuPG.org is a great place to start. Now, starting on a Windows machine, Charlie goes to GPG4Win.org to download GPG for Windows and selects the latest version. To ensure that you have the valid file, you can hash that file and compare the SHA listed here. Or preferably, you can have a valid version of GPG or PGP to verify the signature. Once downloaded and verified, Charlie runs the executable to install the program. This is a simple wizard, and there are supplemental components to install. As you can see, one of the files that is not selected by default is GPG-OL, which is GPG for Outlook email. You can use GPG with or without this integration. It's more about the level of convenience that the GUI provides. After installing GPG4Win, Charlie navigates to GPG4Win from the Start menu and selects Cleopatra. Cleopatra is the graphical keychain manager. A lot can be accomplished with this program, but here Charlie will just use it to create a key pair. Select File and New Certificate to begin the process. Here Charlie will be creating the PGP key pair with an associated name and email address. The name and email address is essentially key metadata. Charlie clicks Advanced Settings and makes the RSA key size 4096 bits. From what we know, a key with 2048 bits will more than suffice for strong encryption. But as long as you're not concerned with encrypting or decrypting a few hundredths of a second slower, I'd go for it, especially because Charlie is electing to keep his key valid forever. Clicking Next to create the key, he enters a passphrase to encrypt that private key. The symmetric key is randomly created, and to ensure randomness, in part it uses mouse and keyboard inputs. After the key has been created, we can see additional information associated with the key, including the fingerprint and the key ID. The key ID is just the last 8 hexadecimal values of the fingerprint, and you should only validate the key with the entire fingerprint. For Alice, on OS X the process is similar. However, she'll go to GPGtools.org and download the latest stable GPG suite. Once downloaded, she clicks Install and enters the wizard and clicks Next. Once installed, Alice migrates to the GPG keychain and, just like in Cleopatra, creates a new key pair and associated metadata. Alice ups her RSA encryption to 4096 bits and symmetrically encrypts the private key with a passphrase. Bob also has a Mac running OS X and performs the same process. Afterward, he saves his public key to his desktop and examines the contents with the text editor. Bob then sends Alice the public key as an attachment. And Alice sends Bob her public key. She opens up Bob's key and it automatically imports into the GPG keychain. Alice and Bob go way back and verify their fingerprints over the phone. Remember, if it's a stranger, you'll want to do a much more in-depth check. Once verified, she signs Bob's public key. Bob signs Alice's key as well. There is an area to mark how carefully you validated the key belongs to that person or agent. This is more relevant with the PGP Web of Trust, which is beyond the scope of this tutorial. When using the private key for signing or encrypting, you'll need to enter the passphrase. Bob then sends a cryptographically signed thank you email to Alice. It's not encrypted, but signing will validate that the message came from him. Alice sees the message, and the system validates that it is signed by Bob. She then replies, requesting to meet at 5:30, and this time signs and encrypts the message. Bob receives the email and decrypts, revealing the signed invitation to meet. Bob agrees and specifies a place, but this time he does so in a text document. Bob right-clicks and selects to encrypt a file. This could be anything from a text document to a video. He then selects to encrypt for Alice using her public key. An interesting thing to note here is you can encrypt for multiple people. He signs the file as well. Instead of using the local email client, he uses gmail.com instead, attaching the encrypted file. Alice receives that file on gmail.com, downloads it, and decrypts it locally, validating that it was indeed from Bob. We can see that Alice decrypted without entering her passphrase. This is because the passphrase by default is cached for a short time. If Alice and Bob wanted to be even more secure, they could encrypt and decrypt files on a very secure computer not attached to the network. Then, once the files were encrypted with GPG, they could transfer them manually via USB for distribution on less secure machines.